Hi, folks. This is Tim Schmidt here in Austin. How are you? Um, if you're on the call, could you please unmute your phone? We're going to get started right now. We had some issues before, but we're all ready to go. And yes, you should be hearing me. We're going to talk about the agenda, which is taking inventory of your staff, season advances, devising a weekly plan, daily features, and also Sundays and extras, as well as we're going to go through some stat packages. We've got Eddie Harbour from the C&D here, and we've got postseason awards also on deck, and we've got an all-star lineup. That's right, I'm calling you all-stars, Eddie. Chris Beaven from Canton is on the call. Bill Althaus from Independence, a longtime sports reporter there, is also going to be with us in just a bit. Dan Spears from Wilmington is also on the call, and Eddie's sitting right next to me. And for those of you who don't know Eddie, that's the meanest he'll ever look, and he hates that photo, which is why I dropped it in this slideshow just to irritate him. You can attest to that, correct?
I can.
Yes, he's not thrilled about that. So let's talk about your high school sports season and taking inventory of your staff. This is something that's really important as staff sizes have dwindled. Let's not kid ourselves. I know that when I first started as an executive sports editor in upstate New York, overseeing 4 different newspapers, we had 12 people on staff. When I left, we had 3. So I understand completely the troubles, the different obstacles that you're facing. There is a way to help ease the pain, though, and a lot of that is planning and making sure that you're following through on your plan. That's one of the things I want to talk about today, is having a really good weekly plan in place so you know that there are going to be features, consistent features throughout the season that you have to hit, and you can plan for them before the season even comes close. Many of you are getting ready to start fall sports practices. Some of you are already maybe into it. Some are still a few weeks away. We'll talk about a complete calendar of things that you can do to make sure that you have a good weekly plan in place. And also, when hopefully you free up some time, and I know that sounds difficult to do, but using alternative story formats and other goodies, using those pieces, hopefully you free up some time to do some deeper pieces, and that's where the extras and the depth come in. We'll talk about those in just a little bit. Again, if you're on the call, could you please make sure that you're muted or push *6 so that we don't hear your chatter in the background? I'd appreciate that. Let's talk about season previews. That's obviously a really important piece of what we do. And I know how this works. Back in the day, you had 6 or 8 people in your sports department. You covered 12 or 14 high schools. You sent out 6 different guys to 14 different high schools. Everybody wrote a 650-word feature story or an advance on the entire season. And that's how you did it. You maybe hopefully had a big section that the advertising department sold. Chances are it's not exactly that way any longer. You don't have the manpower to go out to every one of your high schools, or if you do, it's going to be really difficult to get to. If you can do it, more power to you. That's a wonderful thing. If you can't do it, there are a number of different ways that you can hopefully still produce really great season preview content without going out to each one of these different school districts and talking to a coach and spending an entire day out there. So knowing your limitations and creating a plan a month in advance is really pivotal to the whole thing. One of the keys to this whole thing, and I had worked with a guy at the Arizona Republic when I did prep sports back then, about a decade and a half ago. I worked with a guy named Richard Obert, who's still their prep beat writer. He was the master of the questionnaire. At the time, you would fax them out. Of course, now you email things out. He would put an in-depth questionnaire out to every athletic director that those ADs would then pass along to their coaches, that would include things like last year's record, number of returning starters, top players, best newcomers, hopefully maybe 2, 3, even 4 possible feature ideas and other interesting tidbits that will go into notebooks and other goodies throughout the season. This is something that if you do and if you spend time over the next 4 weeks doing, the chances that you're going to get really great pieces 2 months from now are exponentially better. If you can do a really thorough job getting in contact with every one of these coaches, not just football. Football obviously is the most important probably in your market, in most markets, but all those other non-revenue sports, for lack of a better phrase, as well. Reaching out to them, chances are you're going to have better results, you're going to have better quality stuff in your newspaper on a consistent basis, and you're going to be able to fill out a weekly schedule if you get those emails and questionnaires out soon. If you'd like an example of one, I'd be happy to send one to you. Just reach out to me at any point in time. Then you've got all these goodies. You've sent out these questionnaires, hopefully sometime this week, next week, very soon. After that, instead of just sitting on these things, you pull out specifics from them. Let's say, like I said, last year's record, the number of returning starters, and a couple of top players. Instead of making a 600-word story on each team, use this data to give fans an overview or break it into small tidbits for them. Who are 6 newcomers from my region that I should be watching for? Who are the 6 best players coming back? And another thing that I think is pretty important, offer background. I know that we all think everybody remembers who won the state championship or the region championship, but if your kid was on the freshman team last year and now was thinking they were going to make JV and got called up to varsity, chances are you didn't walk through the entire season last year, and you don't know that the varsity went 4-4. You certainly don't know what the records of the other schools were unless they're a major powerhouse. So make sure you give those new parents and even new residents to your community some important background, like who won the title last year, maybe a list of the last 10 division titles, region titles, state champions. And what about your stats package from last year? Why not run the whole thing, last year's season-ending stats package, but then just bold all the returning players so folks know who the top returning stars are for this season? And you really want to think like a fan for your previews. What happens a lot of times is we reach out to coaches, we talk to coaches. Coaches want to tell us something specific. They have a mentality they want to push across. I have a quarterback, he's a senior, here's why he's such a good kid and such a pivotal piece to this. But as a fan who's attending these games, a lot of times that's not the big story for me. I'm someone who went to Tonawanda High School in Tonawanda, New York, small town outside of Buffalo. I have no interaction with my most of the students there any longer, many of the teachers. However, I still read stories online, and I want context stories. Is my school now in a different region? Is it? Are they playing a number of different schools? Do they have a new coaching staff? Think about things like mileage numbers to new schools in the league, maybe directions if your school has now switched leagues, even places to stop and eat along the way. That's something that an average fan is probably going to use much more so than finding out that the backup quarterback is such a great kid and an honor student. Have there been improvements or renovations to your facilities? That's a great way to make a quick video or even use a timeline showing changes over the years. These are pieces that add some of those great digital layers, and that's one of the things that we're trying to push more and more of. Digital layers are so important as folks are going more to mobile and tablets. That's a really key piece. And also, what's working and what's not. Trend stories work really well here. Was scoring up last year? Are underclassmen making more of an impact? Is it suddenly a running back heavy league? This is where that story works well. Your advances, rather than featuring one specific player at this time, why not make it a trend story and then give me all those tidbits about stat lines, returning players from each of the different teams going throughout the year. Now, one of the ways that you do this, and one of the papers that does this really well, is the Canton Repository. Chris Beaven is with us. He's the sports editor. They use ASFs for a number of different things. And one of the things they do really well is they advance tournaments, or like this is before the state track and field meet. Chances are you don't have someone who just writes track and field and can go out and write 2 or 3 stories, feature stories on local track and field athletes. Or better yet, you really have context where you can break down every team by team, but you do have someone who knows what times are best, who's been talking to coaches, who knows what we should be expecting from these things. Why not use a 5 questions approach to the season or the tournament, like Canton does in this 5 things to watch at the state meet? And Chris Beaven, you're on the line, right?
I'm here.
Walk me through a little bit how you use these, how you pitch them, and then how, in your case, you actually walk through step by step to get the finished product.
Well, one key is that there's several guys on staff here that enjoy doing these and are good at coming up with them on their own. And in this case, I think the writer Mike pretty much had a plan and then unfolded from there. So this was pretty easy for us to do, really. Just sometimes the hardest part for us is just finding art to sync up with the 5 topics or 4 topics, whatever we go with.
But so who pitches this? Do you pitch it or does the reporter?
It's both. Like I said, in this case, I'm pretty sure it was Mike. Sometimes I'll instigate them, and sometimes it's the writers.
And now, in terms of the actual questions, this is like an FAQ format type thing where you ask yourself questions. Does the writer themselves come up with it?
Yeah, I think in this one, yes. And many times it's a mix. I mean, I might throw out some ideas. In this case, our writer, he's covered track a long time, so he could break down the meat pretty easily as far as what the highlights were for the broadest base of readers to have interest in.
Okay, now this is 5 things to watch at the state meet. How long, roughly, does this take Mike to put together?
I honestly don't know. I mean, a couple hours, I'm guessing.
Couple hours. Now, if he goes out and writes a feature and does a roundup on every team, how long does that take?
That speaks for itself. That's a shift, a couple shifts maybe, depending on how many teams you're trying to hit.
So how often do you use these things? Where maybe, I should ask you this. Where have they not worked? Is there anywhere that you've tried one of these and you just realized after the fact, maybe that wasn't the right spot for one of those?
The only time they haven't worked is if maybe there's just been an issue with the art or a layout person that didn't quite get what we wanted to do. That's the only roadblocks we've run into. It's just, maybe we know who our designer is that day and he's not real strong with that, and we might not do it. Or we just don't have the art with the non-revenue sports. Sometimes if we haven't shot a lot of them, it can be tough to find anything other than some headshots, and it's tough to make those interesting with just headshots. You want to make sure you got a couple of good action shots to build around.
Sure, makes sense. When you use these for non-revenue sports is one thing. Do you use them for football games? Do you use them or not football games, but I know we'll talk a little more about the midterm report card in a little while, but what other things creatively have you used these type of ASFs for?
We've done them for a variety of things. I know we've done like tail of the tape type ASFs. A couple of years ago we did that for a big district championship game between the 2 city schools that had not played each other in several years. So that was a big deal. We kind of did a tail of the tape, and we've done that type of approach too with some football rivalries. When those games are big and we just don't feel like a narrative story that day. So those have worked. We've done it for our pro sports team that's within Canton, the D-League team, the Charge. We've had quite a bit of success doing a variety of ASFs with them and with the Cavs as well. We've done some ASF stuff with them. So we've yet to really find an approach where it doesn't work. It's just always coming up with good ideas and good art to make it work.
Sure. That's great. Okay, we're going to check back in with you in just a little bit. Thank you. Let's talk a little about the weekly planner and kind of, this is one of the pieces that I think a lot of, especially the small newsrooms really miss. Having an absolute week-by-week schedule once the season starts is really important in terms of things like, so for example, the non-revenue sports. If you don't think about cross country, if you don't think about girls volleyball ahead of time, chances are it'll end up in a roundup. There may be 1 or 2 features throughout the year, but that's it. And at the end of the year, you'll realize as you're trying to put together, pool together, maybe some, postseason awards type stuff, that you don't have any art, you haven't done much in terms of being able to get out and see these teams or individual athletes. So one of the keys to this is making sure that you have a weekly planner allowing you to cover all your bases. As our deadlines keep getting earlier too, it's more imperative than ever. You have a master plan. This used to be very simple. You had a calendar, you looked at your overall sports schedule for the fall. You picked out the best game each night. You sent somebody out there, and away you went. especially in the case of the really small newsrooms, that really just doesn't work any longer. If you make something consistent, and I'm going to show you just a very simple schedule in a minute and a simple approach to maybe a football game, you can plan some of these things out so that they make more sense. They broaden out your coverage throughout the week, and it's all coming from one or two events per week. One of the things I hear pretty consistently when I go to small newsrooms is, look, I go to 27 sporting events a week and I only have 40 hours. I don't know how you want me to do more. I don't want you to do more. What I think we need to do is make sure that we have a weekly plan in place. We use all of the tools that are in our arsenal as effectively as possible, and that gives readers of various sports and various schools the best coverage we can possibly give them. One of the keys is, as Chris just said, and that's a perfect segue into this, making sure you coordinate with either your photographers or, if you're the staff guy who has a camera, making sure you have some kind of idea ahead of time what you're going to need to fill so that then you're taking the right kinds of pictures when you're out there. If you get out to a single event and you come back with, as we did in the old days, 2 or 3 good shots, maybe something for the next week's advance, and you put that up in a slideshow, that's really not enough any longer as we're trying to put individual pieces in place for the following week. So here's an example. You have a Friday night football game. You have game coverage for the next day, and on social media you're posting a photo. Hopefully you're getting something on Facebook as soon as you get back to the office, maybe even from the press box at halftime, which is great. You follow it up with something online instantly, and then you have a bona fide game story for the next day's paper. In the case of some folks, where I could tell you here, the Austin American Statesman, which is 175,000 circ paper, their deadline is 8:30 every night, so they don't get high school games in for an entire day. So what they do is they post something quickly online, first to social media, then a decent story online, and then they do a big roundup story of Friday Night Football on Sunday, and they spin it forward where it says, what does this mean in terms of the following week's big games coming up? You're at that Friday night game, you know that throughout the week you have a Player of the Week feature that comes every week. You know you need to set aside a specific photo for that feature every single week. So you know when you're out at the game shooting that you need to get that as well. You're thinking about things like an advance for next week and trend stories, and then maybe you're putting something into a report card like what I'm going to have Chris show us in just a couple of minutes, as well as anything that will have to do with your postseason awards package. These are all coming from one Friday night football game. If you're not planning these things out, if you're not talking to your photographer, I know that I used to make my photographer check in at halftime every game, even if they were staying for just 10 minutes. Halfway through their time there, I wanted to check back, see what they had, make sure that we had enough for the next week and that all the different pieces would be filled as we got through the next week's calendar. So here is a typical weekly calendar. This is what I used to use for my guys at the Niagara Gazette. This was 8 years ago. And every day we had something for football in the fall. Every single day, and this was for 4 different newspapers. Each of them, by the time I left, only had one reporter at each paper. A story that basically outlined, okay, the week's games are over. Where do we stand? Put this into context for me. Who is now the front runner for the division? What does this mean in terms of my local team's playoff chances, or in terms of ramifications even on a region basis? On Tuesday, I had Players of the Week with art. Every week, it was usually sponsored by a local pizzeria, someone in the local market. I know that I saw Canton does a whole poster, which is wonderful. Some of you do this, some of you don't, but it has to be built into the schedule. On Wednesday, power rankings, stats, maybe even picks for that weekend's games. That's something that you can do so that you're spreading out the week's coverage, and you also add some art with that. I used to run a notebook or a scouting report on Thursday. So, for example, each one of the major high schools in the 4 zones that we had would then write a piece about the opponent. Some of you have 15, 20, 30, 50 high schools. You can't obviously do that, but you can put together a notebook, some leftovers, also some art. That's a key piece, is having something Thursday, because you're not going to want to have to write a ton on Wednesday, because Friday you have your full package, art and a full roundup of all the games that are coming, and then on Saturday, some game coverage. Now, with all that, all those other sports seem to fall behind. So how do we fill in the gaps? Well, what we used to do was we send out a Q&A, 3-question Q&A to various athletes in, let's say, girls volleyball, cross country, girls soccer, and boys soccer. I would send these out at the very beginning of the year. Your guys know who the best athletes are at the beginning of the season, or they can find out. When they do that, why not figure out, let's say 8, maybe 10 in each sport of what you think are going to be the best athletes in your region for the upcoming season. Send out Q&As to all of them. Send them to the athletic director, have them filter down to the coach. Very simple, cut and paste them. Ask for a headshot with each of them. Everybody's got one now. Now you've got something that hopefully before August 15th even comes, you can pencil in Q&As for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for the next 8 to 10 weeks, and you don't even have to worry about it because you know it's coming. That obviously gives you broader coverage than you'd have if you just went out and covered 1 or 2 random games and did a feature. Obviously here I have some game coverage or just art for the roundup. That's something that we would do each week. Now I have a really broad calendar that throughout the week I'm covering various things. I'm gathering art for all these different packages for the end of the season or the middle of the season, and hopefully I'm giving everybody a little bit of what they want, making that coverage really deep. Now, in terms of maintaining a daily presence, and I think Bill Althaus is on the line. Bill, are you there? I don't see him logged on.
I am now unmuted. Yes, I'm on the line. How you doing?
Bill, you're there. Excellent. Well, I wanted to bring you on. Bill works at the Independence Examiner just outside Kansas City, and they do something really well at a very small newspaper that I think that when I see other papers that don't do it as well, it makes me just marvel at what you guys do on a consistent basis. One of the things about the Magid research that we got back a few years back, the number one thing that people want from our products is go and do information. And yet in terms of high school sports, we often don't publish the calendar in advance, or certainly don't tell them often enough something that they can go and do each day. And this is a spot, especially on your front rail, maybe even in your agate page, you can become a daily resource. You put some stats in, schedules, quotes, players of the day to help keep local fans engaged. And here's a perfect example. This is the Independence Examiner. This is something that they do every day. And Bill is a longtime sports writer. You have what, Bill? You and one half-time sports writer?
Yeah, our sports editor is also our managing editor, so he's not fully, focusing on sports. Our assistant sports editor is also a part-time news writer, and I'm really the only full-time sports guy.
So on a daily basis, you guys are 6 days a week, correct?
5 days a week.
5 days, I'm sorry. So 5 days a week we have this rail that includes things like a go and do game. What else is in there?
Well, we have the big game of the night. It might be a Kansas City Royals baseball game, but usually it focuses on sports, the prep level, American Legion thing, possibly a big golf tournament, amateur golf tournament. And, I'm listening to you really longing for the days when, I've been with the paper 33 years. We used to have 2 photographers that worked in the morning from 7 to 2, then 2 who came in from 2 to midnight. And we don't have a full-time photographer now. And you're talking about coordinating with a photographer, and we have an outstanding young guy who shoots all the big events for us, all the stuff we need action shots. And coordination is so important. And this rail that we put together is a total team effort. Everyone that covers an event will give a possible quote of the day. We'll give their nomination for the player of the day. You might do a football game where a kid scores 6 touchdowns, or you might we had a kid that got a hole-in-one at a prep golf tournament. It just depends. You talked about mug shots earlier, Tim. Earlier in the season, we get together with all the coaches of major teams and try to get together with the minor teams. Get mug shots of every kid, so we have that handy. And we try to use a mug shot. And this quote of the day might be, I would say the two most popular features of the paper, other than, a really, hard-hitting type feature story where you learn something about a kid that just totally catches you off guard, is this quote of the day. Kids, let it be the quote of the day. I can't tell you how. Nick Pepich, who just joined the Kansas City Royals and is pitching at Omaha, most quiet kid on the planet. He was quoted today his senior year of Blue Springs High School. And he came up to me at the next game and he said, one of my goals was to be a quote of the day in the Examiner. And he's the last guy on the planet you'd think would even think about something like that. So it's a big deal.
But
and then on Thursdays, we have a pigskin pit for the Examiner staff, a couple of high school sport icons, former coaches, ADs in the area, and then a celebrity. And we've had everyone from Kevin Costner to local coaches, former athletes, all the big stars for the Royals and Chiefs. We have a minor league hockey team. We pick them as our guest pickers, and we pick a handful of high school games. Then we pick college and NFL games.
Sure.
And I know people that cut those out every week, put them on the refrigerator. I'll be at an event. I'll be at the bank. I'll be at the gas station. So, Billy, you did do very well in pigskin picks last week. Got to pick it up. And, just little things like that are huge.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, Bill, the quote of the day. I mean, that takes you 10 seconds. It's something you're already gathering, yet it's such a key piece to this, right? I mean, it's not something that takes a lot of extra effort.
We do. We send the story in and we just highlight. But because a lot of times we write from site, from press boxes, things like that, and everybody submits a quote of the day. And, the kids, wow, I was the quote of the day. I can't believe it. I saved that. And now, my God, and I'm still getting used to it. I mean, I'm old. This age of tweeting, and the kids tweeting out that they were the quote of the day. And, it's just really special when you see what this means to a young man or woman. And even, we've got some collegiate kids, big-time guys that I think one day are going to be in the NFL, and they're talking about it.
That's great.
And, as you alluded to earlier, Tim, when I started at the paper, we had 4 pages every day and had 8 pages on the weekend. We now, if we're lucky during the week, have 2 pages, maybe 2.5. So that's totally eliminated most of our agate. And we have 4 to 5 pages on the weekend. So, and people love that agate, especially, what's going on with the Royals and with the standings, things like that.
Sure.
But every day on our side rail, we have what's on today, and it's just the highlights, radio, TV highlights of any game going on. We have 2 radio stations in town who broadcast the big high school football game. That's become huge. If we have a kid at Southwest Missouri State, we have a radio station that broadcasts their games. Anything that we think might impact a reader and let them know about what's going on with local athletes or athletes at the collegiate level, and then with all our pro teams, we'll be included in that.
Great stuff, Bill. I appreciate it. Listen, I got to keep moving on because we've got a bunch to get through, but I think that's a great example, that rail, the way that you package it each day and the way that it's consistent. People know they can go there every single day and say, I want to get out to an event today. Where can I go? And you kind of tell them. And hopefully, as folks are using these ASFs and various pieces, that frees up a little bit of time. I know not a ton, but a little bit of time. And that allows you a little time to start talking about bigger enterprise stories. I want to talk, I know Dan Spears from Wilmington's on here. He's their sports editor, also photo editor now, right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
You're a busy guy. Now talk about how you basically make sure that you have deep enterprising stories in your paper. These are Sunday type or bigger picture stories.
Yeah, the one that you're looking at right there was a story we did last year about the main stadium complex here in Wilmington that is used by we have a summer college baseball team, we have a pro soccer team, and we have our oldest high school all use that stadium complex. And it was how some of the rules and everything had been kind of tilted toward the high school, and almost $750,000 had been spent on an improvement there while other schools were struggling. So struggling to get $10,000 or $15,000 worth of improvements done. We just try to make time for it. If we realize that it's something that's going to be important to our readers, then then it needs to be addressed that way. And if it means that we cover one less game, or we add one more thing to the roundup, or we rearrange some of the things on that person's beat for a couple of weeks, that's okay. And because we know that the payoff at the end with the big story is going to be worth it in the way, in the reaction. The story that you're looking at right now on the screen is about a kid that was on the very, very edge of our coverage area. In fact, we don't really cover that school, but they play in the same conference as some of our other schools. But he was the number 20-something pick in the Major League Baseball draft last year. So we went out there. We took one really good crack at it, and went out and watched him play. And there were all of these scouts out in this little town out in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. Population like 255 is the town he's from. It's way out there. The lead of that story is about people driving down Chicken Road. That's how far out in the country he is. So, but in addition to that story, we also have, we were like, wow, he's from a really small town. So we ended up having our clerk that takes our phone calls, on the nights that it, wasn't as busy, the nights that it rained and he didn't have anything to do. We had him looking up draft picks over the last 15 years, 20 years from really, really small towns. So he was going through every baseball draft in the first two rounds, where this guy was from, and that's the box that you see with the picture of him with his hat sideways. I can't see there. So, we're just looking for the little things to do that with. And this story got great traction because there really wasn't anybody else that covered him. So we took a chance on that, and it worked really well. And that's part of what we do as a group, throughout, especially at the beginning of the year. But we kind of address it in the middle too, and we're actually going to be doing this when everybody gets back next week. I got a couple guys on vacation. What are the important things that you want to do on your beat? We try to get up to 5. What are 5 things that you really feel need to be done or that you want to do on your beat? And then let's make sure that we're giving you the right amount of time to do them. And that story on Eric Jenkins, his baseball player, was one of them. And that's turned out to be some of the stuff that gets the most traction with us. People have given us a lot more, a lot more read on some secondary stuff because we've done those things. We've added to our readership. And as a writer, not only do you want to be out covering the stuff, but you also want to do those things that you get an award for.
Sure.
I think everybody wants to at least feel like, even if I didn't win one, that I wrote something that was good enough to be thought about for an award. And I think that's important for morale, and I think it's important to keep guys fresh, to give them a challenge instead of just cycling yourself through the game, the preview, the post-game cycle that you can fall into really quickly, especially in a smaller sports department where you're trying to jam a bunch of things.
And now you keep all these on a whiteboard still? Is that still the case?
Yeah, we still do that. Yeah, we have a whiteboard in the sports department that essentially lays out loosely what we're doing over the next 3 months. In fact, I have to update it really soon because we're getting into the fall. But basically let everybody in the department, because everybody, whether you're a staff of 2 or whether you're a staff of, 5 or 6, everybody's moving around a lot these days. You're in and out and trying to get to all this stuff, and you kind of lose track of what everybody else is doing sometimes. And I think that gives everybody a sense of, oh, that's what's going on with the other guy. Oh, that's what's going on there. It also helps us and the rest of the newsroom. They get to see what we're doing and what's coming up on Sundays or what's coming up big story-wise in our sections for them to look at. I know that in some places, the sports department kind of gets thrown to the side, and we're the toy department, and it's all cute. That we're doing stuff that really matters to people, too. And I think that, by other people in the room seeing what we're doing, whenever we start talking about it, they get excited about it too. You can get other people in the room excited about sports besides yourself.
That's great. That's perfect. Dan, I appreciate it. Great stuff. And I want to talk about a couple of the things you can do during the middle of the season. And again, this is one of those things, if you have it planned out before the year starts, it really will shine. A perfect example, Canton does this mid season report card, halftime report. There you go. In the case of this one, it's looking back at the first half, also takes a glance ahead. They're using this as a chance to look at the games to watch and the playoff previews for the second half. Again, this is all photo driven. I mean, have a little check in a couple weeks in advance to talk about whether or not you have great photos of the best player, of the best coach, maybe the team photo that they have on the bottom, which is really great. Also, these ASFs, if you're writing 200, 300, 400 words, you're missing the point of it. It's supposed to be one quick hit, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs, 100 words or less. Get something interesting out, but don't take an entire evening doing it. And also, one of the things that I think works well with these is just being flexible. I'm going to ask Chris now. I mean, there's a catch of the first half. That's a great shot there. I'm assuming that that's something you didn't plan for before the season started, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's true. It's just once the photographer let me know he had that, and I'd seen it in the gallery, I decided I'd figure a way to incorporate it, and that's kind of what led to the other 2 categories as well, just to kind of make it a little different.
And that's something now you've done before. I mean, will you talk about this ahead of time, or how does it work? You just know it's coming halfway through the season?
Yeah, I mean, there's some years we haven't done it, but we try to do it most years, and like you said, we're just kind of looking towards it as the weeks go by, making sure that we have potential photos that we'll want of specific players, and then once that week arrives, usually I think we do it in week 6 after 5 weeks, and it doesn't take a lot of time to put together that text.
Yeah, that's a great centerpiece, especially for a smaller paper. That would be a really great Saturday or Sunday centerpiece. I know you use it as your advance in your section.
Right,
I want to talk.
There's different ways you can attack it.
Sure. I want to talk quickly about the icons thing you did. And again, freeing up some time to do these bigger pieces. Walk us through that series, why it was such a big success, and where it went from there.
Well, the big thing, the draw here, and this is just knowing your community. In this case, we have a rich sports history, going back a century, really, in many of these communities, especially through their high schools. So it's something we try to tap into time and time again, and people never grow tired of reading about the legends from their community. I mean, we've written about Paul Brown quite often, even in death, and people still want to read about him. He was a very popular person, obviously, in Massillon, and had a huge impact on the game of football in our area, and then obviously throughout the country. And, it works that we have schools that have links to not just the community in this, Ohio, but making an imprint, on the sports scene around the globe, with Olympians and Major League Baseball players, guys that starred for the Yankees in the World Series, stuff like that. So it's just a way to incorporate that stuff, and we've found that our readers really enjoy the historical look back at stuff through a variety of ways, not just sports. We've done a variety of historical features throughout our paper, some of it coinciding with our 200-year anniversary, which was in 2015, but we've been doing a weekly news look back in history story on Mondays, I think, more than 20 years. And that's one of our more popular features. So I think if you know your community is into something like that, you tap into it.
And then you turn that into a book, right?
Correct. And that was some ways easier than we thought, in some ways a lot harder, but it turned out real well. We were real happy with it.
That's great stuff. All right, well, I've got about 10 or 12 minutes left. I've got Eddie Harbour here from the CND. We're going to talk about stat packages and essentially a way that you can use stats that's a little easier so that you can hopefully use it for both the web and also for your print product. Go, take it away.
Right. Well, we pulled a lot of this information with Jack Flagler from Gastonia, the Gaston Gazette.
Who's on the call, I see.
This is something that came up with him, and he kind of wanted a better way to present his local stats on the web. And one of the other sites chimed in, Patriot Ledger, I believe, and how they utilize Google Drive to present these spreadsheets on their website.
And it looks like, I mean, that's one of the problems, obviously, is with MediaWare and various problems that we have. This is something that you can, like you say here, update numbers with stringers. What a great idea, because obviously I can't let a stringer, access my system.
Into the system. Not everybody's got MediaWare Center credentials. This allows us to get maybe a couple more hands in on what can be a time-consuming process throughout the week. Sometimes you'll get coaches who readily give you your numbers. Sometimes you have to pry them out of them. Sometimes that might be on Monday. Sometimes that might be on Wednesday.
Okay.
And this gives you a little more access to, get these numbers up to date.
All right, now Eddie is going to provide us with a PDF that I'll send out to everybody who's on the call to walk you through this step by step, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. But essentially, take us through this. So this is first how we're going to put these on the web, right?
Yeah. So once you kind of have your numbers together, and again, like Tim said, there's a PDF walkthrough that kind of get you through step by step here. Once you've got that spreadsheet set, you're going to just use the embed feature in Google Drive. And if you're not using Google Drive currently, I really encourage you guys to do that. There's a lot of great features in there, not just for stats keeping, but for scheduling and
budgeting,
myriad
everything.
Myriad things.
Yeah.
So please get familiar with Google Drive. It's a great asset. You're gonna embed those stats into a MediaWare Center article, the digital article. In that story package there that you guys see there, I have two different digital files. One that we're going to use for the web and one that we're going to use for print. I think you all kind of understand the digital print workflow. But in that web one, we're just going to embed the information from that spreadsheet. If you want to slide to the next slide there. Maybe. There we go.
There we go.
You're just going to embed it into the HTML code in that file and then publish that out to the web. It's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. To get it into print, all you're going to do is back into that spreadsheet, and you're going to convert that spreadsheet into a CSV, which is a comma-separated value. It takes those different columns in a spreadsheet and replaces those columns with commas. At that point, we're just going to swap those commas out for semicolons. And that's pretty much it. That copy is now just about ready for print. It's for those of you that are in the center, we like to have semicolons in place of actual tabs, and then we swap those out on the design end. But for the most part, that's about it. It's a pretty easy process to get it onto the web and then to get it into print.
So once I have the actual numbers in, to put them on the web and then prepare them for print, give me a rough time frame how long that's going to take me total.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Awesome. Okay.
And that's 10 minutes to get it on the web and to get it into CND's hands.
Really? So there you go. I mean, I know that's something I've heard before. We just can't do this consistently because it takes so much time. I mean, if you want, follow these step-by-step instructions. If you have an issue with them, something's not working, there are various tabs along the bottom on the actual Google file, the Google spreadsheet file. I would be happy to walk you through it. Eddie would be happy to walk you through it. Hopefully this makes things a lot more efficient. And then, of course, the most important part, it gives you access to post these things quickly on the web and have them for print. Yeah, maybe the frontline work is a little more difficult than you'd want. Not too cumbersome, though, because hopefully you can have other hands in there. And then once you actually post them to the web, it's much easier. So that's a really important piece, and thank you. I appreciate that. On very quickly to postseason awards. That way I can get you out of here before the top of the hour. Canton, I'm going to come back to you real quick, Chris, just because I really appreciated one of the best features that you pushed along, which was just an ASF. Talk a little about this, because I don't think you've done this way in the past, right?
No, this was new because of us joining the Gatehouse Live crew to do our Best of Stark Awards at the end of the school year, which was basically like SVs for our area, where we honored high school athletes, coaches, and put together a really nice event. In advance of the event, this was something we did to have a nice Sunday centerpiece to kind of push interest, and I knew we had good art on all these kids that we were considering for the overall Athlete of the Year awards for the male and female, and the designer that day I knew would be able to pull it off, and we came up with a nice package here.
Now this was just, again, going through. Obviously, the art is a big key to this, but, you could see 150 words probably per athlete, something like that. This is something that if everybody contributes, takes the staff an hour or two to put together probably?
Yeah, maybe even less than that in a way, because this was something all along. I had different guys putting together the little bio capsules on these athletes because we needed them for the programs we were putting together. There was a variety of reasons we would need these, so they were kind of in the system floating around. I just one day put them together in about 40 minutes, edited them down because they were a little longer for the program, and we came up with this. And really, throughout the season, I've been keeping track of pictures on various kids, so there was only 2 kids in here where I struggled to find photos, and like maybe one of them was actually from the previous season, but otherwise it was pretty easy to do, from that end.
Now talk about the actual event, and Michael Irvin was the host, correct?
He came in and it was like did his thing and did a little Q&A, and like I said, it was a really nice affair. We did it at our local civic center, which is where the D-League team plays, and can house up to about 4,000 people. We set it up kind of the way the Hall of Fame sets up for that's where the Gold Jacket dinner is that you see on TV every year where the Hall of Famers get their gold jacket. It's the same venue. We made it so it seat about 1,000, and it went really, really well for us. We got great feedback from the corporate sponsors, from the kids that were honored, the kids that weren't honored, the parents. Everybody seemed to really like it.
How was the attendance?
We exceeded what we want. We actually had to kind of have a little standing room area almost.
Really? So obviously this is something.
Setup was.
Yeah, this is obviously something you're going to do again. I mean, what are the plans for next year?
Actually, the 4 corporate sponsors were thrilled, and they're already back on board for year 2. And we're into the early planning stages of how we'll pull it off again next year. But yeah, it went well, and like I said, it was through Deed House Live, and they helped with a lot of the logistics of it and making sure that it came off looking like a first-class event. They were great to work with.
That's great stuff. I'll tell you what, great stuff. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Well, just a couple of quick takeaways before we wrap this up. Really, make sure, oh, by the way, I have a question from Brendan, I'll get to it in just a second. Make sure you're setting realistic but lofty goals. I think one of the key concerns that I hear is we just don't have enough people. I know Bill said that before, but if you know what you have coming and you know how many folks you have, really make sure that you put a plan together that makes logistical sense for everyone, but also has you humming along so you have enough in the paper each day. It really is a very delicate balance, but it's something I think more editors and reporters need to kind of sit down, especially in advance of a season, and say, what's realistic? How often can we do it? And now let's set a specific schedule and stick to it throughout the year. I'm telling you, the earlier you get forms out to ADs or in some cases coaches, and use email as often as possible for things like Q&As, anything else like that you can pull information from, the better off you'll be, the fuller your product will be. Make sure you have that consistent weekly plan and stick to it. For some of you, it'll be a real hefty plan. For some of you who would just have 1 or 2 folks, it might be smaller, but it's something consistent every single day. Try to make sure you have some go and do features in the rail like Bill and Independence does. I think that's a great way they handle that on a daily basis. Use ASFs as often as you can to free up some time for things like advances, report cards, those postseason awards. I think Canton does a great job with those as well. Planning for some of your bigger stories. I always suggest brainstorming sessions. Keep them short, but have folks bring 2, 3, 4 ideas to the table. Maybe others on the staff can help flesh them out a little bit. That's always a key. And use these new and improved stat packages for both the print and web. If you have questions about them, I'll be happy to answer them, or I'll have Eddie make sure that he answers them in a very timely fashion. Brendan said, how would you describe this layout to your designer in your edition summary? We constantly struggle with describing our visions. Got an answer for that?
For which layout?
Yeah, which layout are you talking about specifically, Brendan? If you could add on top of that. Did you mean like the last one, so this best of the best? How would we do something along those lines if I had this as a thought for my designer?
To be frank, if you're offering that up on the edition summary, you're 2 or 3 days too late. This is something that really, we want these planned out in advance, especially something that's going to be this ornate and this with this much detail on it. If we want this done right, we want this ahead of time.
Yeah, and this is something that there was a template that we used for a couple different papers last year, correct? With the postseason stuff. And if you make sure that we get a call or an email a few days in advance, I'd say as far as a week or even more, what happens then is you have one of the DDEs or someone even on the sports
your team lead,
Yeah.
the manager. You got a couple different people involved outside of just your normal designer, who we can then turn an eye to this and really give it the attention it deserves.
And that's one of the problems. As I go out to some of the newsrooms, I try to implore consistently that a week in advance, a phone call or a quick email makes a huge difference in terms of the product that you're going to get at the end. This is a perfect case. Excellent. I really appreciate everybody coming on the call. I'm sorry I kind of jammed a lot into a short time. If you have questions, concerns, again, give me an email. I promise I'll send out Eddie's PDF to everybody who's been on the call. And if you'd like a copy of the actual webinar, go ahead and send me an email, and I'll make sure to get that to you as well. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I gotta wait until I can't believe I was talking for like 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. That's hysterical.